Good morning. Today I'd like to share with you some of the results from MORE, multimodal optimization for road space in Europe. The challenge we face is that demands on busier urban roads and streets are increasing due to a variety of factors, including the emergence of new modal options such as e-scooters, growing mobility-related sectors such as home deliveries, a greater interest in catering for place-related activities on our streets, and population and employment densification. And yet, despite these growing pressures, curb and carriageway space is largely fixed, so pressures increase and conflicts intensify. So how does MORE address this conundrum? Well, we do so by using street space more imaginatively, flexibly, and dynamically. And we're looking at the scope for using LED road signs and road markings to help with achieving that on the ground. The approach that MORE has taken is to identify existing and future pressures on urban main roads in cities that connect the core of the urban nodes, the city centres, ports, etc., with the trans-European road network. We call these the feeder routes. MORE is developing design tools and processes that will enable these key routes to be planned, designed, managed and operated in a way that make them responsive to future pressures in a flexible manner. And to do that, we're developing 4 suites of tools. The first around improved methods for generating innovative design options. Secondly, engaging stakeholders more meaningfully in street redesign exercises. Using a detailed micro simulation model to look at differences in behavior under these different street layouts and to offer a comprehensive evaluation of the design options that are generated. As part of MORE, we have 5 cities spread across Europe who are our laboratories for actually testing out these tools and ideas, alongside which we have a number of universities, consultancies, and groups representing particular types of street users. Each of the city is identifying its own feeder route. Here you can see the feeder route in London, which in the east comes in from the M25 orbital motorway around London into the inner part of London. But along these feeder routes, we recognise 2 rather different conditions. The first, typically found in outer areas, is what we call roads. Here, we're just catering for motorised traffic. But as we come in towards city centres, these turn into streets where we have non-motorised traffic, cyclists, pedestrians. We have frontages or buildings on either sides that generate demands for parking and loading. We have streets where people want to congregate and talk and so on, and also people need to cross the road frequently. These are the areas that we think face the most intense pressures, and therefore we've identified in each city a stress section where we're looking in great detail at how it operates now and how we might improve that operation in the future. So here, for example, we see some outcomes from a public consultation exercise in London looking at the New Cross area stress section, and we can see different responses. People can put down examples of the things they think are problems at certain times of day in certain places, and so on. Also, in each of our stress sections, we're doing very detailed surveys of vehicle movements, pedestrian movements, and here it shows pedestrians actually congregating on the footway, whether it's waiting at bus stops or outside cafes or whatever, or just chatting to friends. We need to design for that as well. Also, obviously, we're looking at things like the distribution of traffic accidents, and here on our stress section in Lisbon, you can see the location along that particular area. And again, in Lisbon, you can see we've been looking at the extent of illegal parking occurrences where people pull up for parking or loading in places where they're not technically allowed to do so, or there are double parking or something like that. In the work we're doing in our stress sections, we're thinking of the street as an ecosystem. So in other words, we're not just looking at the carriageway and the footway, we're recognising the importance of the buildings on either side that generate the demand for parking and loading, bus stops and things like that. Also, what happens under the street, either metro systems relieving capacity constraints or things like electricity, water mains and things that could burst and cause problems. And also increasingly the scope for using the airspace above the streets. But the key thing is to be imaginative in when we consider these design options for reallocating urban street space. And to do that, we're encouraging cities to think systematically about their priorities. Which are the different street user groups? What uses do they want to accommodate? And what level of priority do they give? Similarly, overall, what are their objectives for these streets in terms of movement, supporting place, road operation, or different types of wider objectives, whether economic, social, or environmental? What are the priorities? COVID has actually been a great opportunity to encourage or indeed enforce cities to think much more imaginatively and perhaps more extremely about the opportunities for space reallocation. On the left-hand side, you can see here in Boston, a road that previously was just for general traffic has been divided up to provide a segregated cycle lane, a segregated bus lane, and one lane for general traffic. Much more radical than perhaps would have happened before COVID. On the right-hand side, in a German town, we can see how part of the carriageway and the potential parking spaces have been taken over to allow outdoor dining during COVID distancing restrictions. So we've been developing tools as part of option generation to help people think more imaginatively about how to use the street space. And here you can see examples of the different ways that you could lay out the use of space from building line to building line. Also in the simulation work, we're using the VISIM model by PTB. And in that, they've developed that tool further to look in more detail at the use of curb space, coming up with measures of curbside efficiency, looking at how easily people can actually allocate, find the space on the curb, and also what sort of revenues authorities might expect under different charging regimes. We're also simulating in more detail place activities, actually the need of footway space for people to congregate, to queue, to sit, and so on. And also in the context of looking at how we can respond to different needs on the network in different times and allocate space more dynamically. In addition to developing our 4 sets of tools, we're also looking in more detail at 2 particular issues that we think need more attention. The first of all is a different approach to street regulation. Instead of being reactive, to be proactive. In other words, at the moment, when a new mode is introduced by the private sector, such as an e-scooter, cities and national governments rush to decide how to regulate them. What we're suggesting is to take a more proactive approach where we recognize that different parts of the street have broadly different functions, the footway, cycle lane, carriageway, and to define for each of those spaces a permissible performance envelope in terms of things like speed of travel, degree of protection, lighting, things like that. So that when an entrepreneur comes along and has an idea for a new mode of urban transport, they actually design it to fit one of those performance envelopes, which then enables more consistent planning and design, a selection of street materials in a way that will lead to future coherence and positive development. The second thing is a question of LED signing and lighting, which has a number of challenges. First of all, we want to allow for the use of different parts of the street in different ways at different times of day. So one time something might be part of the footway, another time a part of the carriageway. But how do we do that in a way that's obvious and safe? Secondly, how do we ensure that the electronic signs and road markings are correctly operating and visible under all lighting conditions? Thirdly, regulation depends on having signs that not only people can read, but that there is evidence that the person didn't follow what the regulation that was on the sign. But if the signs are changing dynamically, how do we ensure that we have a reliable record of what the person saw at that time and one that's enforceable in the court of law? And perhaps most challenging is how do we determine how to handle transitions from one state to another? If something moves over from parking to loading, how do we let people who would normally park there know they can no longer stop or would need to move after a certain time? Or if a general traffic lane becomes a bus lane, how do we make that transition without causing confusion or danger for people who are on the road network at that time? These are the sorts of challenges we're addressing in More. If you'd like more information, please either contact me or look at our website, www.roadspace.eu. Thank you.